wouldn't call myself a very active person, but I do enjoy working out and running every now and then, to stay in somewhat good shape. My friend Jay and I usually work out and run together, as Jay is always in shape and kind of trains me, if you will. Jay and I would often run late at night in my neighborhood since most of it is well lit, and I live in a decent area. However, we stopped running in my neighborhood 2 months ago after this happened. The way my neighborhood is laid out is that there's a main road that connects to separate roads branching off, but ultimately they all connect back to the main road, which leads to a dirt path extending into local farms and larger properties. This is important to understand the situation Jay and I were in. One night, we decided to run from my house onto a path that goes through the woods to one of the roads that branches off from the main road in my neighborhood. We planned to use that road to reconnect to the main road, then continue running to the dirt path before heading back to my house using the main road. I know it sounds confusing, but we took this unusual route to maximize the miles we could run, as our usual path, just running on the main road and back, was getting too easy for us. The run started as usual, with Jay and me running from my house to the path, talking about high school drama as we ran. However, we soon began to hear footsteps behind us. At first, we didn't think much of it since the path we were running on was frequently used, and we often saw other runners or people using it to cross from one area to another in the neighborhood. But as we continued, the footsteps remained behind us, mirroring our speed. When we picked up the pace and ran quickly, the footsteps followed suit. When we slowed down to a jog or walk for a moment, so did they. At this point, Jay and I were obviously a bit nervous and freaked out, but we were almost to the well-lit road. When we finally exited the path onto the road, we looked back and saw no one behind us. We both exchanged the same what the f*** look and decided it was probably just another runner trying to keep their distance from us. We continued onto the side road that led to the main road of my neighborhood and followed the main road all the way to where it turned into the dirt path. At this point, we were both still feeling good and decided to push on, running further down the dirt path. However, unlike the main road, this path had no streetlights and was lined with trees, creating an ominous atmosphere at night. Jay and I ran about a mile down this road before deciding to turn back. As we turned, I caught a glimpse of a dark figure quickly darting into the trees on the left side of the road. This immediately reminded me of the footsteps from earlier, and I began to feel noticeably uneasy. I told Jay that I had seen a figure jump into the trees along the path that we needed to take back. He dismissed it, saying I was just being paranoid and seeing things because of how far we'd run. I almost believed him and started doubting myself, so we began making our way back to my house. We ran past the spot where I had seen the figure with no issues, but just as we were about to reach the main road again, we heard rustling about 20 feet behind us in the trees. We turned around and saw a figure standing in the middle of the dirt road. The figure was facing away from us and was dressed in a black hoodie, along with very ripped and dirty khaki pants and black shoes. At this moment, I was more scared than I had ever been in my life. It felt like my heart was going to fly out of my chest. It was beating that hard. Jay looked at me, then back at the figure, and said, "What the hell are you doing?" but stopped mid-sentence when we both heard the person start laughing. It was an awful, cackling, cringe-inducing laugh. Then, as we stood frozen, the person turned to look at us, still laughing, before suddenly stopping. Now, he just stared at us with a glare that still haunts me to this day. His wide eyes and pale face burned into my memory. Jay and I exchanged one last look before running faster than we had ever run in our lives, sprinting the entire 2 miles back to my house. As we ran, we heard that terrible laugh again behind us, which only made us run faster. When we finally got back to my house, I threw up, then rushed inside through the back door, locking every entrance and shutting my garage doors. We sat there panting, still processing what had just happened, and swore never to run in my neighborhood at night again. If you're a night runner, always stay in well-lit areas and bring a friend, just to be safe. As a high school junior, I ran cross country and track, and I loved running alone. I wasn't the fastest on my team, but I had endurance and could lose myself in the rhythm of my feet hitting the ground. A woman in a quiet rural neighborhood near a forest preserve had hired me to run her hyperactive puppy, Izzy. She'd pay me $10 per run. It seemed like an easy gig. Izzy needed the exercise, and I got a little extra money while training. The area had scattered houses, abandoned farms, a cemetery, and the remnants of a disbanded cult commune. My parents had always warned me about running alone in secluded areas, but I figured I was fast enough to outrun anything dangerous. That changed one evening. It was just before dusk when I took Izzy out for a longer run. The setting sun cast a deep orange glow over the treetops, but shadows stretched across the road, making everything feel darker than it should have been. The only sounds were my breathing, Izzy's panting, and the rhythmic thud of my running shoes against the pavement. Occasionally, a bird would flutter in the trees or a distant dog would bark, but otherwise it was eerily quiet. The farther I ran, the quieter it got, as if the world was slowly emptying itself of sound. About 2 miles in, we reached a stretch of road flanked by thick forest on both sides. That's when Izzy suddenly stopped. Her ears perked, and she stared into the woods, completely still. A low whimper escaped her throat. I followed her gaze. At first, I saw nothing but the dense trees, branches swaying slightly in the breeze. But then, between 2 trunks, a man's face peeked out from behind a tree. He was short, maybe in his 30s, wearing a hat pulled low over his face, a thick jacket despite the mild weather, and gloves. His eyes were locked on me, unblinking. His stillness unnerved me, but I told myself he was probably just a hiker or a hunter. Still, something about the way he stood, like half hidden, watching silently, it sent a chill down my spine. His presence felt off, like he wasn't just some guy passing through, but something wrong, something that shouldn't have been there at all. I gave him a polite nod, trying to appear unfazed, and I started to jog again. My heart was beating a little faster now, and not from the run. A few steps later, Izzy stopped again, her body rigid, tail between her legs. My stomach dropped as I turned back. The man had moved closer. He wasn't behind the tree anymore. He was standing right at the tree line, just feet from the road, still staring. His head was tilted slightly now, as if studying me. A sickening realization crept in. He wanted me to know he had moved. He wanted me to notice. I felt something cold slip down my spine. My body was instinctively preparing to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe he was just some weirdo trying to mess with me. Maybe if I ignored him, he'd get bored. I kept running, trying to stay composed, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. At first, I thought he was gone. The woods looked empty again. But then, just as I turned forward, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. I turned back, and he was sprinting toward me. He had a butcher cleaver. A choked scream got caught in my throat as pure, unfiltered terror exploded through my body. I didn't think, I just ran. Adrenaline shot through me like electricity, and I pushed myself harder than I ever had in a race. My breath came in ragged gasps, Izzy struggling to keep up, her leash jerking in my grip as we tore down the road. I had never known fear like this before, a kind of fear that exists deep in the bones, a kind that tells you you're gonna die if you slow down. I glanced back only once. He was still chasing me. His face was twisted in pure rage, his mouth slightly open as if growling. The gleam of the blade catching the last rays of sunlight. He wasn't just running. He was running erratically, his arms flailing in unnatural motions, his legs moving almost too fast, like something that wasn't used to running at all. That's when I realized he wasn't breathing. I could hear my own frantic gasps. I could hear Izzy panting. I could even hear the distant rustling of the trees, but not him. His footsteps thundered behind me, his pace matching mine, but there was no sound of breath, just that awful silence beneath the pounding of his boots. I reached a neighborhood and sprinted between the houses, zigzagging through yards hoping to lose him. My vision was blurring, my legs were screaming, but I couldn't stop. I darted behind a shed with Izzy. Finally, when I was sure we had put enough distance between us, I pressed myself against the rough wooden wall, gripping my knees, gasping for breath. Silence. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat still hammering in my ears. Slowly, I turned my head. At the top of the hill, he stood, watching. The cleaver dangled from his hand, his chest rising and falling as if he had just stopped running too, but he wasn't chasing anymore. He was just standing there, staring. We locked eyes. His face had no emotion now, no rage, just that blank, unsettling gaze, as if he had simply lost interest. A minute passed, and then another. A car's headlights appeared in the distance, beams cutting through the dark, and just like that, he turned and walked back into the woods. No hesitation, no hurry, just gone. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally did, I took the longest route back to the woman's house, sneaking through the yard so I wouldn't be visible on the main road. My hands shook as I took my payment, acting like nothing had happened. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell my parents. I knew if I did, they would never let me run alone again. I don't know who he was. I don't know if he was part of the old cults, a drifter, or something else entirely. But I do know one thing. I never ran in that direction again. This is a story spanning nearly 7 years, so I will try to be as straightforward and to the point as possible. I live in a suburban neighborhood surrounded by rural countryside. There's nothing but open fields and winding country roads around it, and it's practically impossible to get anywhere without a car. It is a very beautiful place, but very secluded. As a result, I often feel confined here, which has only gotten worse during quarantine. The first time I remember seeing something suspicious was when I was 9 years old. My little brother and I, who was 7 at the time, were taking our dogs down towards the front of our street, near the main road. We were casually talking and not paying much attention to what we were doing. Suddenly, we heard somebody call to us, "Hey, come here." A big, white SUV was parked at the start of our street, and a man was sticking his hand out the window, motioning for us to come over. I remember distinctly that it was a tall white guy with curly blonde hair. My little brother started to walk his way, but I stopped him. I'm a very paranoid person, and I'd heard all the horror stories about kids being lured into vans, never to be seen again. I led us off in the other direction, back to our house, while also keeping an eye on the guy in the car. When he saw that we were leaving, he turned his car around and drove off. Upon arriving home, I told my mom about it, but she dismissed it, saying he was probably just going to ask us for directions or something like that. It scared me a little at the time, but I didn't think much of it until now. A year later, during Halloween of 2014, another incident happened. A black sedan was apparently following trick-or-treaters down the street. When a parent approached it, it tried to run them over before driving away and out of sight. To make matters worse, the license plates appeared to have been taken off. I didn't see any of this myself, but some of the adults in the neighborhood had made a big stink about it, and I was given yet another "don't talk to strangers" lecture. People were especially sensitive about this kind of thing at the time, since the murder of Hannah Graham had recently taken place in my area. Fast forward another 4 years to summer break in 2018. Some neighbors of ours were out of town on vacation, and they asked me if I could pet sit for them while they were away. I had to go by 3 times a day to let their dog out. Once in the morning around 8 a.m., once in the afternoon after lunch, and once in the evening at 9. Their house sits to the right of our neighborhood, off the main road. To get there from my house, I can go to the end of my street and take a right, or I can cut through the woods and into their backyard. Going through the woods is faster, but the brush is very dense and the trees are close together, so I usually would just go along the street. One night, wrapped up in a session of COD with my friends, I forgot to let the dog out. When I remembered, it was past 10, and I rushed over, worried that he might pee on the floor inside. It was pitch black out, and I couldn't see anything but the beam of my flashlight and the glowing stars in the sky. Luckily, the dog had been able to hold it, so I let him out as usual. After he went, I brought him back in and was prepared to leave again when I looked out the window and saw a black sedan parked next to the driveway. This made me uncomfortable since I was pretty sure it wasn't there when I first showed up at the house. There were no other houses nearby, and I knew for a fact that the owners weren't coming back for another few days. After debating what I should do for a few minutes, I finally decided to go back and cut through the woods. I did so, and got back without issue. To play it safe, I cut through the woods for the rest of my time pet sitting, but I never saw the black car again. Now, these occurrences alone would not be enough to merit a story, but it's what happened recently that really terrifies me, It makes me question whether these events might actually be connected. I run for the track team at my school, and since quarantine had prevented us from having practice, I go running every day on the roads around my house. My street isn't very long, so I often run off the main road and other connecting ones. For the first few months, everything was going fine. I would jog around for an hour, taking in the scenery and exploring the various different country lanes. But about a month ago, I was running back home on the main road when I noticed that a car seemed to be following me. I always run on the left side of the road going towards traffic. This is so that if a car comes up behind me on a blind curve or in an area with low visibility, it won't hit me from behind where I can't see. The car, coincidentally a large white SUV, was on the other side of the road, going about the same speed I was jogging. This was especially odd because there aren't many cars on that road, and you can go much faster than on a busy one. Unsure of its intentions, I turned down a small side street with a cul-de-sac at the end. It didn't follow, so I ran down to the circle and went back home. However, the next day, it followed me again. This time, I saw it sitting at the start of a driveway, and it pulled out after me once I passed it. Like the day before, it followed me for about a mile before I turned down the same street, where it promptly drove off. This continued. Every day for a 10-day period, it followed me. At first, I thought that it might be going somewhere on a schedule that just happened to coincide with my runs. To test this theory, I decided to run an hour later than I usually did. The first day I tried this, it wasn't there. The next day, though, I was disturbed to see that it was once again following right behind me. This definitely unnerved me, but I was hesitant to tell my parents because I was worried they'd forbid me from running. Furthermore, it hadn't attempted to do anything yet, so I decided I could put up with it as long as I was careful and watched it closely. On the 11th day of being followed, I turned down the side street to see a black sedan sitting at the end. At first, I thought nothing of it. There were a few houses on the street, and it likely belonged to somebody who lived there. But as I began to get closer, I noticed something odd. Underneath the car, barely visible, was the silhouette of a person. They barely fit and were huddled on the far side to avoid being seen. I immediately got chills and ran off in the other direction, looking over my shoulder to make sure they stayed put. To make matters worse, I saw that white SUV, which usually drove away, was sitting at the top of the street, penning me in. I was feeling panicky now, and decided that I preferred the evil I knew to the one that I didn't, so I picked up the pace and tried to sprint by the SUV. When I was within a few feet of it, a man jumped out and ran after me. I easily outpaced him, and thank God that my months of training had paid off. When it became clear he couldn't catch me, he yelled at me to come back and said he just wanted to talk. I responded with 2 fingers, if you catch my drift, and I sprinted the remaining mile back to my house. I finally broke down and told my mom, who got me on the phone with the police. Sadly though, since I didn't get a license plate, there wasn't much they could do. They promised that they would look into it, but as far as I can tell, nothing has been done. These experiences have haunted me for the past couple of weeks, and with all my spare time, I've had a lot of time to contemplate the situation. After connecting the dots, it's clear to me that these men have been trying for multiple years to kidnap a child from our street. There are quite a lot of children in my neighborhood, which explains why they frequent it so often. It worries me that somebody less cautious than myself might find themselves in a similar situation and fall prey to these predators. I still have nightmares about the man who chased me down the street. He was very tall with blonde curls, the same man who tried to abduct me when I was 9 years old. Mark was a college student living in Indiana. His house was quiet and sat next to some woods. During the day, everything felt normal, but at night, the woods made the place feel strange. Behind his house, under the patio, there was a hot tub. That's where everything happened. It was Saturday night, March 29th, around 12:30 a.m. Spring break was ending and school was starting again soon. Mark had his 3 close friends over, Kyle, Keenan, and Derek. They were spending one last night hanging out. They were in the garage playing pool, blasting music, and drinking. Everyone was laughing and having fun. It felt like a good night. After a while, Kyle said they should go in the hot tub. It was cold outside, so the warm water sounded even better. Everyone agreed. They got changed into swim trunks, grabbed their drinks, and went into the hot tub. The warm water felt good as they talked, made jokes, and didn't pay attention to the time. Then they heard something. It was the sound of sticks breaking, like footsteps coming from the woods. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded like a person. They all went quiet and looked around. Keenan tried to calm everyone down and said it was probably nothing. The others laughed, but it was more to stop feeling nervous. They turned the music up louder and tried to keep talking. About 10 minutes later, a man walked out of the woods. He stepped into the light from the patio. He was wearing a long black coat, white sweatpants, and a gaming headset. His eyes were wide, and his face didn't show any feeling. Everyone jumped. They yelled at him and asked who he was and what he was doing. The man raised his hands and said his name was Seth. He said he was 33 years old, and he heard them laughing and wanted to join. The guys just looked at each other, confused. Mark told him to leave, but he didn't listen. Instead, Seth took off his coat, then his shoes, and then his pants. He was now in only his underwear. Then he got into the hot tub. No one knew what to say. Mark pulled out his phone and started recording, not for fun, but because the whole thing felt unreal. This was the footage he captured.
Wait, I smoked the drink right there. What was over here?
They started asking Seth questions, like where he came from and if he knew anyone there. He just kept saying he heard them laughing and wanted to hang out. Then he said something really disturbing. He said he had molested a child. That changed everything, obviously. The guys jumped out of the hot tub and started yelling at him to leave. They pulled him out of the water. Seth didn't try to stop them. He just stood there, dripping wet and staring. Then he slowly walked back into the woods without saying anything. The group ran inside and locked all the doors. Some of them laughed nervously, trying to shake it off, but Mark and Kyle didn't feel okay. They felt like it wasn't over. About 15 minutes passed. Kyle said they should go back out to lock the hot tub. Mark said okay. So they got flashlights and stepped outside. That's when Mark saw something next to the hot tub. It was a phone. He picked it up and saw the screen light up. Whatever was on the lock screen made him drop the phone. He didn't say what it was, but it scared him. He said he thought Seth would come back, so they ran inside and told the others. Everyone tried to stay calm. Then they heard a tapping sound on the window. Mark already knew who it was. He opened the curtain, and wouldn't you know it, Seth was standing right there. His face was pale, his eyes were wide open, and he had a creepy smile. He didn't say anything, he didn't move, he just stared. Mark yelled for Kyle. Kyle ran in and called the police. Mark grabbed a bat and went to the front door. He yelled for Seth to leave and take his phone. Seth didn't answer. Instead, he slowly walked around the side of the house. Mark followed a little bit and looked through the patio window. Seth was standing there again, staring inside. Mark told him the cops were coming and that he needed to leave, but Seth didn't move. He just slowly raised his hand and waved once. Then he turned and walked back into the woods. The police arrived a few minutes later. The guys told them everything. The officers searched the woods and found Seth standing alone, just looking toward the house. They arrested him for trespassing, and everyone thought it was over. But Mark didn't feel that way. A few days later, he saw a post on Snapchat from a girl who lived nearby. It was a video. It showed another man, not Seth, trying to break into her house late at night. That's what bothered Mark the most. It meant Seth might not be the only one out there. There could be more. They could be connected, and they might not be done. A few years ago, 3 high school friends named Beck, Matthew, and Tyler decided to explore a sewer tunnel in their neighborhood. It was winter and very cold outside. The tunnel was at the edge of their neighborhood, under a small creek next to some office buildings. These buildings were empty and dark at night. The boys had seen the tunnel before, but never went inside of it. It always looked creepy, and they joked about it, but deep down they were curious. That night, they finally decided to go in. They brought sleds with them, thinking it would help if someone asked what they were doing. They knew they weren't allowed to be there, but they wanted to do something exciting. Just as they pulled into the parking lot, a police car showed up. A police officer got out and asked what they were doing there. Someone had apparently seen them on the security camera. Tyler quickly said that they were just going sledding. The officer looked at them for a moment, then told them to leave. So they left, but only for a little while. After driving around for about 30 minutes, they came back. This time, they parked farther away, behind a building where no one could see them. They walked down a hill behind the buildings. They could see their breath in the cold, crisp air. They stood in front of the tunnel, noting how big, round, and completely dark inside it was. They turned on their flashlights and walked in.
Turn off your light, everybody. Okay.
Oh, look at that.
Dude, this is oh, look at the date, dude. Oh,
6/19/19.
dude, 19. Oh my god, this is getting Dude, I can't.
Dude, how did we even find this? Oh my gosh.
Inside the tunnel, the ground was dry. It was quiet, except for the sound of water dripping deeper in. The walls had graffiti all over them. Most of it looked old, but one thing caught their eye. A date was spray painted in large red numbers. 6/19/19. The paint looked newer than the rest, like it was done recently. That made them feel uneasy. Their flashlights weren't very strong and didn't shine very far. Still, they kept walking and acting tough, but deep down they were nervous. The farther they went, the colder it got. The temperature was dropping fast. Even though they were underground, they could still see their breath. The walls looked like they had ice on them. Big icicles hung down from the ceiling. Some were huge and sharp.
Keep it slow,
Oh, I see a light down there, see it?
I think I saw movement. Wait. What's that? Hello?
We keep going?
Did we keep going?
Bro. Dude, and these icicles can like impale you, dude. Look how long.
Suddenly, a loud cracking sound echoing from further down the tunnel sends the group fleeing in fear. The sound resembled something heavy hitting stone. It wasn't any of them. The sound came from deeper inside the tunnel, too far to see. They tripped, slid, and bumped into each other as they rushed to get out. When they got outside, they were shaking and breathing hard. That's when Beck noticed his phone was missing. He had dropped it while they were running. Tyler and Matthew told him to forget about it. They didn't want to go back in, but Beck didn't listen. He grabbed his flashlight and started walking toward the tunnel again. The others followed, but they didn't want to. The tunnel felt different this time. It felt even darker. The air felt heavy and strange, like something was wrong. Their flashlights didn't work as well, and the silence was even worse than before. It felt like something was watching them.
I feel like
I feel like my pocket got like a little emptier over here. Like somewhere over here. Matthew, go over here this way.
no, dude, that's when we fucking heard the noise.
Shit, dude. Do I have to go back there?
You're going first, bro.
I know, yeah, we're not leading the way. Yeah, somebody else lead the way, please.
No, it's your phone.
At some point off camera, Beck found his phone. Afterwards, the group continued deeper into the tunnel investigating. And that's when they heard a sound.
That rock, it must have hit like here or something.
What was it? Do you remember what
A loud scream came from deeper in the tunnel. It echoed off the walls and felt like it was getting closer. They didn't wait. They turned and ran as fast as they could. This time, no one talked, no one looked back. They just ran. They got to the car, jumped in, and drove away without stopping. The car ride back was mostly silent. The three friends thought it was over when they all got home. They were ready to move on with their lives. But late that night, Beck's doorbell rang twice. This was at some off hour in the night. When Beck's dad went to answer the door, nobody was there. This of course begs the question, were the boys followed home that night? Or was it simply a very unfortunately timed ding-dong ditch? That remains a mystery. The night left more questions than answers for the three friends, but they all heard the noises and of course got it on video. Perhaps it was something they weren't meant to stumble upon. In April of 2022, a man named Connor took a construction job far from home as part of a 3-month accommodation program. The pay was decent, and he needed every dollar. He wasn't in the best place financially, and the bonus of working alongside his longtime friend Jim made the opportunity more appealing. They figured it would be a nice change of pace, extra cash, time away from home, and some peace from the chaos of everyday life. The job itself wasn't bad. A few weeks in, Ryan had adjusted well to the routine, but the area they were stationed in was remote, deep in rural countryside. There were long, winding roads with barely any signs of life. It wasn't unusual to go miles without seeing a single home. Ryan had always loved the outdoors, and he saw this isolation as a chance to unplug. Most of his coworkers blew their weekends drinking, but Ryan had different plans. He wanted solitude. He wanted quiet. So when Friday rolled around, he packed his gear and prepared for a weekend of hiking and camping deep within the woods. A narrow trailhead just 5 minutes from his temporary accommodation became his entry point. Within 20 minutes, he was deep in the forest. The only sound was the wind and the crunch of his boots. He smoked a couple joints as he made his way further in, letting the stress just melt away. The isolation was comforting for him. Well, at first. Around 7 p.m., the sun began to sink behind the treetops. Shadows stretched long across the trail. Ryan knew it was time to find a place to settle. That's when he noticed something unusual. There was a scent in the air, burning firewood, and a light layer of smoke drifted between the trees. At first, it seemed normal, maybe another camper, maybe a local. But then, he caught something just barely in the corner of his vision. The faint orange glow of fire flickering through the trees. Curious and confident, Ryan left the trail and headed towards the source. He wasn't scared. He'd trained in combat sports during his teens and stayed in good shape. Still, something about this felt off to him. As he moved closer, he began to see strange metallic glints. Shopping carts, dozens of them. They were tied to trees with rope hanging from the branches. Some mangled and suspended in bizarre positions, like a twisted jungle gym of rusted steel. It didn't look like a campsite. It looked like a ritual site, like something meant to be seen and feared. Ryan pulled out his phone and started snapping photos. He had to prove this to his friends someday because no one would believe it otherwise. Then, something even stranger caught his eye. Hung directly above the fire was a charred, old-fashioned duck ornament. Sitting in the duck's back was a scorched baby doll. The thing was melted, its limbs warped from heat. Ryan took a photo of that too, but the longer he stared, the more disturbed he felt. His chest began to tighten. The fire was roaring, clearly tended to recently. There were water bottles scattered around. Someone had been there, or currently was there, maybe still watching. He thought about turning around, thought about heading straight back to the trailhead, but something made him keep walking. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, just some weird loner, maybe drunk, probably harmless. Still, he checked over his shoulder more than once. 20 minutes passed, and he'd put real distance between himself and that eerie camp, but daylight was fading fast, and he needed firewood before it got too dark. He veered off the trail again, this time to gather supplies. He wasn't worried. He had emergency wood in his pack, but not enough to last the entire night. He needed more. After about an hour of preparation, Ryan had set up his tent and built a small fire. It was around 9 p.m. when he prepped a steak and potato meal in foil and nestled it in the glowing embers. He smoked another joint to dull the anxiety, and for a while, everything seemed okay again. With his meal finished and the fire crackling, Ryan settled in for the night. He turned on a pre-downloaded playlist of true crime podcasts, listening to cold case files as the forest around him darkened. There was no signal out there, no distractions, just firelight and static-filled voices recounting unsolved murders. At some point, he drifted off to sleep, but it didn't last. He woke up suddenly. The air inside his tent felt colder. The fire outside had dimmed. He checked his phone. 4 a.m. He didn't know what had woken him up until he heard it. Whistling. A slow, eerie tune carried through the trees surrounding his camp. He froze. His body wouldn't move. It was like something inside him had shut down. He lay motionless, listening as the sound crept closer. Then the whistling stopped. What followed was worse. Soft footsteps, fast, light, and quiet, circling his tent. He couldn't see them, but he could hear them crunching twigs and shifting leaves. His heart pounded in his throat. Then, without thinking, his body finally snapped into motion. He jumped up, threw on his boots, and burst out of the tent. What made it worse, what twisted the fear into something primal, was that the footsteps had come from the direction he had entered the trail. The way back to safety was now blocked. He had no choice but to run deeper into the forest. He sprinted as fast as he could, crashing through brush and low branches. But behind him, he could hear more footsteps, multiple, and they weren't in sync. The sounds overlapped, too fast and scattered to just be one person. There were two of them, maybe more. For 5 straight minutes, he ran until his lungs burned and his legs begged for rest. He found a dense cluster of trees and dove into the underbrush, burying himself in leaves and tangled roots. He didn't move. He barely breathed. The footsteps faded, distant now, but he didn't dare come out. He waited, still and silent in the dark. Eventually, he knew he had to move. He crawled through the forest with branches cutting into his arms and legs. Every step was slow and careful. When the trees finally began to thin, he broke into one final sprint. He recognized the trailhead, the way out, and he ran without stopping. No one followed him after that. The forest was quiet, but the damage was done. He got back to his accommodation and immediately reported the incident to the police. They took his statement and promised to investigate, but he never heard anything back. To this day, Ryan believes the people who chased him were the same ones who built that bizarre shrine of carts and dolls. What they were doing out there and what they wanted, he doesn't know, but it was more than just a creepy encounter. To him, it felt ritualistic, cult-like. He finished his contract and returned home, but the memory never left him. He still remembers the sound of the footsteps, the whistling, and the feeling of helplessness. If there's anything to learn from this story, it would be to trust your instincts. If you find something that doesn't feel right, you should leave. Ryan almost didn't, and he knows he might not have lived to tell the story if he had stayed.